Welcome to Great Northern Cascade Division in N-Scale. My name's Ian, and in this video I built the Cascade Tunnel helix. So about 3 or 4 months ago I built slightly smaller helix that connected the upper deck to the middle deck. That then let me kind of blitz through and connect the track that I had on this middle deck and then finish up some more. So in the previous video I had gone through and kind of got the approaches built, the grades that would get you from Skycomish up to the top of the helix on the middle deck, and I also built some of the grade around here on the lower deck that would then take you around to Leavenworth. So we've got the westbound Empire builder here that's made its way up from Leavenworth and the climb through this helix. This video isn't going to go kind of like in-depth how-to on actually building the helix. If you are interested in the construction methods and stuff like that, go and watch the video from about 3 or 4 months ago. That one ended up almost an hour long, but it did have a whole lot more how-to and kind of time-lapse stuff of the construction, and I kind of gave some guidance as I went through. This one is much more kind of just showing the build as it kind of went along. I talk a little bit about the BD4N from Digitrax for the block detection. Each of the rings is kind of wired up to do block detection, so I can keep track of the trains as it moves through. This helix worked out really good, probably because I just built one about 3 or 4 months ago, so this was fairly smooth going, but also just in general the helix was a little bit smooth. There was a little bit more space that I could play with here. So this helix ends up at right around a 2% grade on each of the rings. It is 24 inches in diameter, and it's climbing a little over 11 inches, right around 11 inches. So it takes about 3.5 minutes for the trains to get all the way through the helix, depending on the speed that you're going through, 3.5 to 4 minutes. Which is about kind of what I expected, and that's also why in the previous video I talked about the grades kind of on the middle deck and the lower deck so that we could take out 1 or 2 turns of the helix. And that's actually worked out really good now that we've got something like the Empire Builder running through it. The train isn't completely disappeared in this helix for 8 minutes, 10 minutes. It gets kind of boring as the operator. But what it does mean is that I can get trains all the way, like the Empire Builder, from Leavenworth up into Seattle. And it ends up being about 25 to 30 minutes to do that, which, you know, ties in really nicely to, by the time you get to Spokane, it's probably about a 45-minute run from Seattle to Spokane. So let's have a look at this video as we kind of go through building this Cascade Tunnel helix. This is now giving me a ton of momentum. It's also kind of giving me a kick up the butt to tidy up the lower levels so that we can start putting some track down on there too. So thanks for watching. Please do like, subscribe, and follow along. Let me know what you think of this Cascade Tunnel helix, and we'll be back again soon. So this is at the start of the excitement to get the helix put together. Main thing, the hardest thing I think, is cutting these damn things out. So we got 4 of those rings, and exact same process as I used on the previous helix build. So I kind of fashioned this together just to mark out the inside, outside, and then the track radius. So this was from the previous helix that I built, and then these were the new holes that I did just so that I could draw out circles. So if you're not sure how I went about doing this, I had a fairly long video. It was almost an hour long on building the helix that went between the middle and the upper deck. So this one, I'm going to try and keep this video a little bit shorter and maybe not show as much of the actual construction method and time lapse and stuff like that. But real quick, I just use that homemade template just to draw out one of these, and then I have, I think it was a 1.5 inch cap that I have off a bottle that I then use to draw out semicircles, drilled holes on the edges of all the semicircles, and with a jigsaw then just went around, cut out the middle, climb inside, cut out the outside. There are different methods that you can use to do this. Some people say maybe this is a little bit wasteful, and they then just do, you know, quarter segments, and then you can stagger them over a sheet of plywood and stuff like that. Honestly, just for the speed, this works fine. And then I do end up actually using the inside pieces that get cut out. So for example, the curved sections on the approaches on the middle and the upper deck, they were all cut out of these pieces that came from the previous helix build, but I went through one of those just to cut out those 4 sections. So the plywood does end up getting used. Maybe it's a little bit wasteful compared to doing individual segments, but I just found that this was an easy way of doing it. So also had done a base. It's just a simple sheet of plywood, 48 inches by 48 inches, and then just rough cut some corners on just so that it wasn't sticking out completely. This will all be hidden anyway, and the actual fascia itself will bend around and the mountains will be there, so not that big of a deal, but at least for now I didn't want to, and I know I would, keep walking into the corners and bang it into my hip. So next steps, and I might do some time lapses of this part, cutting down the threaded rods. And so again, exact same as last time, this is 1/4 inch threaded rod, and then I think it was 20 threads per inch, so it's 1/4 by 20 is kind of how it's referenced. And these are 36 inches in length, and so I by 8 of them cut them in half. 18 inches is enough for the helix that I'm going to be doing, and then at the very end I just take a cutting disc and take the top off them. Do also then have the washers and nuts for everything. I'm going to sand down this plywood base just quick before I get started, and then I've got some other hardware pieces just to help go ahead and do that. So after we got that done, drill down the holes for where the thread rods are going to go through, clamp these onto this base, drill all of the holes in those kind of semicircle pieces, and that's where the rods are then going to come through. So let's kind of slowly make my way through that, and then come back and have a look once we're ready to actually start getting these helix rings put in place. Alright, well that was a little bit more bumping and banging than I was kind of expecting it to be, getting it lined up. I did end up, you probably saw, having to cut this. I was hoping I would have been able to leave it and go all the way through to where the top of the helix was going to come through, and then it would have just been one continuous piece that would have gone I'm okay. I think I've got plenty of room where I can put a decent length strip, 10, 12 inch strip in there underneath and screw it in. I think that will hold it in okay, and then be able to join the top of the helix. There was one of the rods here ended up just off to the edge of here, but enough that bit of a pain to get the nut in, but otherwise all the other ones I managed to avoid hitting any of the cross pieces. I had somewhat tried to work it out, but I'm not going to take credit for that amount of planning. That was just very lucky that pretty much all those holes went straight through where there were none of those cross pieces. So this is then the first ring of that helix in. Obviously none of it's level. I didn't get any of the digital level out to do this. This is, you know, barely even eyeballing it. It was just banging it down in place so that it was there. And then you would have seen basically it's nut, washer, nut. So now I need to go through and put more washers on top and run the nuts down. I need to go and get the other packs that I have in the garage to do that. But leveling it is going to be the next one. And so what we'll do, we can kind of come over here and you'll see I'll just raise it up to wherever it would be. Actually that's a bit of a bugger. I've got the washer on the wrong side. But I'll just raise up that nut to whatever the height will be, and then put the washer and nut on the right way, coming down on there, and then lock it in place. So I need to go around with that level and get this ready to go, and then we'll go on and do the track as well. Same as I did on the other helix, just do one ring at a time, get the track down, get it wired in, test it, make sure that loco will actually go up and down it, because once it's in place and then you do the next ring, it will get really hard to get in there and have to do anything with the track and the wiring and stuff like that. So I'm going to go back and do a little bit more time lapse, and then we'll come back and have a look hopefully once I have this all leveled and with the track down and ready to roll. so hopefully there was a whole bunch of kind of time-lapse stuff going through there as I was doing the construction. Do have this first ring done. A little bit fiddly, a little bit more time consuming than the other rings, because you really want to get this one right, because the other rings basically literally build on top of it, but got to get this first one right because that kind of makes sure that everything else will run through. So this is not one of my best running locomotives, and rolling stock one of them just has low profile plastic wheels rather than replaced with the Eastern Seaboard metal wheels. Also running long nose forward on that loco, but it's all intentional because I want to find stuff that's going to have the hardest time going up and down a helix. And if it'll run now, then when I put stuff that I know will work fine, like the Cardo and Intermountain F units, the passenger cars from Lowell Smith and Cardo, even some of the Concord ones, where they just run a lot smoother. If I know that this little train can make it up and down, then the nicer stuff will be just fine. But it's important to go through and test as you go. Whole lot harder to come back and try and do any changes on wiring after everything's all in place. Do also have this BD4N hooked up. This little Digitrax unit that's doing detection, so the light goes out when there's no actual movement from the loco. I am recording a separate video, which I said I was going to do on the other helix, never actually got around to it, so I am recording separate video on getting this BD4N running. But basically you'll only actually have signal on that and detection on that when there is DC signals being sent to the locomotive and the locomotive is responding to it. So if the locomotive stalls out, the locomotive derails, it won't actually indicate on that BD4N that it's within one of the detection zones, which is really kind of the behavior that we want. So if I kind of bring the loco to a stop, the green indicator light goes out because there's no DCC signal being sent if the loco had stalled or if it had derailed. Now that I've sent a signal and the locomotive's responding, then it's telling me that there's something in that first detection zone. So as we go through and add each of the rings, rather than just having the normal soldered metal rail joiners, the inside rail will have an insulated rail joiner. Stop the loco. Insulated rail joiner, and that will then create those different detection zones. So each ring on the helix, exactly the same as I had on the other helix, each ring on the helix is its own detection zone. Then at some point in the future we'll hook up external LEDs to that BD4N, so that on the front of the fascia somewhere it'll show you the indicator lights as a locomotive moves down or moves up through the helix. So this is all running fine. I did solder the rails, although a little bit different than how you would normally do it. When you would normally do curves, you would normally solder it in and then bend it around and makes it a little bit easier. It's actually kind of hard to do on a helix because you have to get the track in between the upright rods and it then doesn't really bend properly. And so I kind of do a little bit of a mix in that I'll lay the track out, bend it, cut it, and then once it's in place, then I'll come through and solder it. So you might have wondered why that was a little bit out of order than how you would normally see laying and soldering the rail joiners on curved track. That's why. I don't typically solder on any of my straight sections just to allow room for expansion, but here in the helix, kind of have to make sure that you don't get anything just kind of getting a little bit wonky in those curves. So now that this is all done, it's just kind of rinse and repeat for the next 2.5 rings. So I might do some time lapses as well, but now it's just going to kind of be the slow boring stuff of just repeating this again and again. So as I go, though, I am going to do a little bit more on that BD4N block detection unit because it is kind of cool. So a little bit more video as we make progress along the way, and then hopefully we'll come back and we'll see a whole bunch more progress. So there's still some cleanup work to do, and I don't have the approach section down on this lower part of the helix built just yet, but let's see if we can get this train going and kind of let it make its way up the helix while we kind of talk through progress that has been going on. So all went pretty smoothly. Almost a pro at this now. It's the second helix that I've built. This worked out right at 2% grid. Right at the very top it does claim to 2.25% just to be able to join up to that section that runs down. Did move this just a little bit, you probably can't even tell, but I did have to loosen up the screws there and then along here just to kind of pivot it a little bit so that we have somewhat of a nice transition as we come off that helix ring, and this is part of the cleanup that I need to do to make that a little bit more neater. Don't have the upper helix ring done on the BD4N, but you can see it kind of flashing as it went between first deck and the second deck. So first ring, second ring, third ring, they're all running through on the block detection. But then because I only have 3.5 rings, I actually have to run the feeder wire off the inside rail on that fourth ring all the way over to here. But happy with how that block detection works, and so basically as the locomotive that makes its way up through the helix, it then trips that block detection, and so you can keep an eye on the progress. Mending brushes, again, I went over more specifics on the construction on the first helix build video that I did, but in case you're just watching this one, you're not sure, these are just mending brushes that I'm using that then just screws and attaches the two helix rings together, and they're more than strong enough to be able to keep them all aligned. And then this little doodah you might have seen me use when I was bringing all of the screws down rather than having to do them all by hand. It's just a little piece of foam that's then chucked onto a bolt, and then I wrapped it in some gaffer tape just so that it didn't destroy the pink insulation foam. And it's really just a little tool that when you put the drill on high speed, this spins around and then it spins the bolts down, and so it's super duper easy to be able to get those on. Takes out a whole bunch of time. So say a little bit more cleanup work to do. I need to take a cutting tool just to trim down all of these metal rods now, because this is pretty much it. Can get those cut down. I need to do feeder wire for the BD4N for block detection, and I need to start working on the approach span from the lower deck. But we should see here locomotive make its way off the helix and quite happily transition through onto that middle deck, which is right around here, is kind of as far as we've been able to get to before, and so somewhere around here is where the tunnel portal would be, and that can then make its way up to Skycomish. So from starting there to then popping out the top, about 2 minutes 45, something like that. Let's call it right around 3 minutes, which is pretty much what I was going for. It's about 45 to 50 seconds or so to complete each loop of the helix. And so again, we talked about on the previous video with these approaches that we did on the lower deck, climbing, and then on the middle deck where it's descending. And I was figuring was taking out about 2 rings out of the helix or something compared to how we would have been. And so that actually, you know, is a pretty decent saving. It saves at least 1.5 minutes or so of going through this helix, and so that's then just more time that you actually see the trains running around on the layout rather than just going around doing circles. So here's that locomotive quite happily made its way up into Skycomish, and we'll just let that carry on all the way through as well. So I am going to do a little bit of cleanup work and also then start working on this approach. I only have, I think, 3 more lengths of code 55, so I may be going to be able to get onto this approach span. I think I've got enough to be able to curve it around and then get onto here and figure out exactly. I think I'm going to come out through here, curve it around, and then join it, but I'm not going to be able to get all the way up to Leavenworth. I'm going to have to order more track, but the main focus was getting this helix going, and quite happy with that. Let's take this short little train westbound, I guess, from what would be Leavenworth, eventually obviously isn't Leavenworth. It's a whole mess. We'll get to a bit of a discussion on that in a couple of minutes. So I did get track lead on this section that I had already put in place, these kind of approaches, and so pretty much as soon as you come out of what would be Leavenworth, you start climbing at about 1%, gets up to about 1.5%. Luck was running a little bit faster than would maybe normally run it, because otherwise it'll take about 10 minutes or so to get over to Skycomish. Runs quite happily through all of this. I think I talked about it on the previous video when I was kind of putting in the all the framing for this 24-inch radius curve here, 24-inch radius curve here, and like I said, the whole thing climbs at 1%, 1.25, gets up to about 1.5% right around once it comes out of this curve, so that it then comes up and ends up hitting the helix, 1.5, 1.75, gets into 2% right around when we get into that helix. So moving quite happily through here, which is actually kind of surprising given how terrible that little Atlas locomotive is. But again, like I talked about as we were going through some of the helix construction stuff, kind of wanting to run this loco on some of these cars, because if this short little train makes it up okay with the wheels and the couplers and the actual state of the engine, then pretty confident that something else will. Have taken 509, the 484 heavy Mikado from Broadway Limited through. That goes through just fine as well. So I will pull one of the Empire Builder sets through just so we can have a running shot of that going up and down, but I am pretty confident that it'll be no problem. Goes through that other helix that from the upper deck to the middle deck just fine, and this is not quite as steep and not quite as tight radius curve, so it'll run just fine. There is more wiring on this than you might have seen. I did add some additional feeder wires for that block detection unit. It's a little bit finicky, needs a little bit of tuning, and I think I'm also getting some interference across some of the wires, but for the most part that works out okay. And again, it's kind of keeping track of progress of the train as it would move up and down through the helix. So whilst that kind of finishes its way through, let's kind of spin around a bit. I think what I'm going to end up doing is actually kind of stopping and leaving the track here. I kind of blitzed through that middle deck because it was fairly clear and it was fairly straightforward, but on the lower deck, Leavenworth, I want to have at least one siding. I might actually put an industry or two somewhere around Leavenworth through to Wenatchee. I haven't quite decided yet, but I need to clear up a bunch of space on the bottom here. I've got all kinds of tools and scrap materials and things like that, so I need to clear up the middle deck, and on the other side I've got tools and scrap materials and stuff hanging on the other side of that central wall. I also want to put lights in. There's plenty of room to get the lights in. It'll be fairly straightforward, but it was a little dark at the start, when that train was running along the bottom here, and so I think I'd want to put lights in before I would start doing too much else. And I might also put up skyboards on that middle deck, again, kind of blitz through quickly to get it done, but it was a little bit of a pain then trying to get those skyboards in after the fact. So in a very speedy loco here at about 4 minutes, and we're already through the helix and on our way to Skycomish. So this is way faster than it would normally be running, but it proves that it'll quite happily make it up here. And again, this is a little bit of a climb. It's about 1.5% here, but then it evens out to about 1% grade just as it was coming into that turn. And so now it's fairly shallow, and so even though in the prototype it would technically be climbing still up to that west portal, we are descending a little bit just so that we can take out 1 or 2 of those turns in the helix that we've talked about before. So there it is, coming over what will be some kind of trestle bridge in the future, and it's going to kind of blow its way into Skycomish where we'll park it up. But yeah, on that lower deck, I think I'm going to do lights. I think I'm going to figure out skyboards as well, kind of slow down a little bit. And then we'll walk around over onto the other side just to kind of think through what I'm probably is going to end up doing for DCC stuff over there. We'll bring that to a stop in Skycomish and just leave it there. But over on this other side, we're going to have Wenatchee Yard, and probably a couple of industries coming in here. And again, why I'm slowing down, I need to clean up. And so there's probably going to be 2 or 3 power sub-districts that come through over here. So I'll need to pull a couple more DCC bus lines to get over to the main Digitrax equipment that's over in the corner there. And then what I'm thinking of doing is I do have one DCC bus line that comes over here, but I was always a little unsure as to the best way to approach it. And I think what I'm going to end up doing is actually using this DCC bus to feed another PM74 that I'll mount somewhere around here. And so the DCC bus will actually end up being a feedback to one of the 5 amp boosters. And then off the PM74 that I would have here, I would be able to feed Spokane Station. I'll be able to feed the return loop once that Japanese layout moves out the way. And then a little maintenance facility that I'm calling Hilliard, it's not. But a little facility would be in there. That would give me at least 3 power sub-districts that I would need, maybe 4 if I split up the stations, but I don't really think it's necessary. But I think that will be make a little bit more sense to put PM74 over here, since this is where I need like 3 or 4 different power sub-districts, rather than pulling 3 or 4 additional DCC buses all the way along this 32-foot wall and then 10 feet over to where it needs to be. It's you know, going to be well over 120 feet or so of wiring if I choose to do that. So I'm going to call this video to an end. Hopefully it's been somewhat interesting to see the second helix going in place. Went really smoothly, no real problems. It's only been 3 or 4 months since I built that other one, so quite happy with how it turned out. Really cool now that I've got track all the way down to the lower level. It's kind of crazy because we're probably right around a year since I started doing the Seattle stations. I did not expect to get down here quite so quickly. I thought that the helix would have given me a little bit more of a headache than they have done. So I think, like I say, a little bit of cleanup down here, get this lower deck cleaned up, start thinking about skyboards, start thinking about putting in lighting. I've got enough power sub-districts to at least get me over to Wenatchee and kind of to the edge of Spokane. But then before I can do anything on that Spokane side, I do need to expand out again over here on that Digitrax system. And again, I got a video where I talked about how we added in this 20 amp power supply in one of the dual 5 amp boosters, the DB220. And so the plan is there'll be another DB220, and that will feed another PM74 in here, so that I've got plenty of different power sub-districts for in the Bay Yard and maintenance facility that will be there. And then one of the 5 amp circuits off the other DB220 is probably what we'll throw over towards Spokane, and then just hang one of the PM74 units over there rather than adding it into the gaps that we've got there. So that is kind of a whirlwind on building the Cascade Tunnel helix. And then see what happens in the next few weeks. I am going back to England for a couple of weeks, so there might be some UK train videos, and might head down to National Railway Museum in New York, or the museum that they have in Sheldon. So maybe there'll be some little videos of rail fanning over in the UK after I did a little bit of rail fanning over in Japan. I might get a little bit of work done down here before then, but I think it's probably going to be once we get back before we'll have too much layout progress video. So take care, we'll be back again soon, and thanks for watching.